Good evening. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I want to thank my colleagues who are here from City Council. I saw Councilmember Porter, I saw Councilmember Ramos out there, Council Vice President Middleton, Councilman Gray, Councilman Jones. I want to thank everyone from the administration for joining us this evening. I see the Deputy Mayor Gerasa in the back. I see Director Sarah Whaley has joined us. I also want to thank our witnesses who will be joining us this evening as well. They include Director Whaley from the Mayor's Office of Overdose Response, Krista Taylor from Behavioral Health System Baltimore, Dr. Melissa Buckley, Chair and Associate Professor from the Department of Social Work at Coppin State University and member of the Trauma-Informed Care Task Force, Tahir Duckett, Executive Director, Center for Innovations in Community Safety, Georgetown Law, and Fariha Wahid, who leads our city's Trauma-Informed Care Task Force. We are also honored to have two witnesses joining us online. Chief Patrice Andrews is Chief of the Durham Police Department. She will speak about the Durham Heart Program. And Andrew Dameron is the Director of Denver's 911 system. He will provide an overview of the Denver STAR program. Last year, Baltimore achieved the unthinkable. We reduced violence to record lows. And we did it through community policing, trauma-informed care, credible messengers, the group violence reduction strategy, and effective prosecution, not mass incarceration or civil rights abuses. We pioneered extraordinary innovations in public safety, and we shocked the world. Baltimore is the first city in the country to have legislated trauma-informed care. We are a leader in using public health to cure violence. And yet, we have more work to do. Over the summer, Baltimoreans experiencing mental health crises were killed in quick succession during interactions with police. These tragedies clearly showed that we have not done enough to meet people where they are. Our law enforcement is stretched thin. Police cannot solve mental health challenges, though we are working to train officers and gain experience. But the reality is that we ask our officers to do too much outside of their scope. Put simply, cops are not clinicians, and we should not expect them to be. Now is the time to build on our successes by introducing the next innovation in public safety and expanding trauma-informed care we provide. Baltimore deserves a comprehensive, coordinated community safety response system. This system would give us new options for responding to residents who call 911 or 988 and provide on-time, quick response when it is a non-violent, non-issue having to do with weapons. Let me take a brief step back to explain how we got here. In August, we convened a hearing in this committee of the whole to examine why calls like the ones that ended in tragedies over the summer were not being sent from 911 to the system's 988 helpline. What we learned is that our 911 to 988 diversion program was designed to be limited in scope. Specifically, this program serves people who can explain the mental or behavioral health crisis they're experiencing, or who are with someone who can explain it for them. And that's it. Even with this narrow scope, we don't have enough responders working within the system. The wait times can be ridiculous. And when someone is in crisis, they can't wait around. After last summer's hearing, we asked Behavioral Health System Baltimore to recommend how we could become a best-in-class alternative response system. BHSB provided two recommendations, and we appreciate them for doing so. The first recommendation is to fund an initiative to encourage our social work students to enter the community-based crisis response field after graduation. I'm pleased to report there is great interest in our schools of social work, and we're honored to have Dr. Buckley from Coppin State here to talk to us in detail about the benefits of bringing this recommendation to life. The second recommendation is to create a citywide civilian emergency response system, or, as I'm calling them, community safety responders. These folks could deploy quickly and address a wide range of 911 calls that don't involve violence or a weapon. The reality is that many people who call 911 are not calling because they're experiencing violence or a crime. They're calling because they need help. Maybe they're experiencing homelessness. Maybe their mother has barricaded herself in her home and won't come out. Maybe they and their neighbor are having a screaming match. Maybe there is someone wandering in the street. While these calls can and often do overlap with mental and behavioral health issues, that is rarely explicitly stated when the call comes in. But people know that 911 is the one number they can call to guarantee that someone will come out to them. Many of these calls do not require a police officer. As Denver, Durham, and a growing number of cities across the country have come to understand, many calls for issues that do not involve violence or a weapon are much better handled by trained civilian responders or in a co-responder model. Police responding to mental and behavioral health calls and the problematic interactions that have ensued in some cases is part of what has led Baltimore to be under our federal consent decree since 2017. And while the Baltimore Police Department has made excellent strides toward complying with the requirements of the consent decree, one of the requirements calls for a policy of least police-involved response in situations where individuals are experiencing a mental or behavioral health crisis. Developing a community safety responder program could help us accomplish that goal. For too long, our city has been known on the national stage for the wrong reasons. Yet we've known all along that Baltimore is a beautiful, brilliant, scrappy, resilient city with some of the most compassionate, creative, quirky people in the world. And now, the rest of America is finding out. People across the country are talking about what we just accomplished in reducing violence. They're talking about our arts, our culture, our restaurants. This is our moment to be bold and innovative, to once again reshape how we think about community safety, to meet people where they are with care and compassion. I've been grateful to partner closely with the Scott administration on this work. Appreciate the work of Director Whaley. Let me introduce her as our first witness. Director Whaley will make clear that we are not starting from scratch with the discussion we will have tonight. She will share the many new and innovative initiatives that are being developed right now in Baltimore to extend services to individuals who are experiencing substance use disorder or other types of mental health needs. Before I go to Director Whaley, I do want to be really clear with all of our friends this evening. You are going to have 7 minutes. We are going to be strict on time. The little buzzer is going to go off, and I'm going to ask you politely to stop. So just want to give that forewarning to everyone this evening. I also want to welcome, I see Councilman Conway, I see Councilmember Blanchard, I see Councilman Parker, and Councilmember Ramos. Thank you for joining us tonight. Director Whaley, the floor is yours for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Council President. I've practiced, so we should stay within that time frame. Good evening, Council President Cohen and members of the City Council. Thank you for convening the hearing tonight and for the opportunity to testify. For those guests that I don't know, my name is Sarah Whaley, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Baltimore City Mayor's Office of Overdose Response, which for the last year has been tasked with coordinating the city's overdose response, and as of July, overseeing the city's efforts to transform our behavioral health service systems consistent with paragraph 97 of the city's consent decree, which I'll describe a little bit later in my testimony. I officially joined the city last year from Johns Hopkins University, where I served as faculty at the Bloomberg School of Public Health and advised and provided technical assistance to state and local governments across the country. I think that's important context, but more importantly and relevant to the hearing today is that I started my career in behavioral health, not specifically substance use, and I've had a variety of different roles in my career working with people with behavioral health needs, including as an outreach worker in Baltimore City. Too far. In today's presentation, I'll give a brief overview of the history and operation of the city's Behavioral Health Collaborative and the work that they are doing to transform our behavioral health service systems. I'll explain what Baltimore City has built so far, what we are continuing to build, including with support from the Opioid Restitution Fund, and what is needed to ensure what we're building lasts long term. So a little bit of background on the consent decree following the investigation into the death of Freddie Gray. The city and the Department of Justice entered into a consent decree to guide comprehensive policy reform in Baltimore. The city's Behavioral Health Collaborative was stood up to carry out this transformation and convenes cross-sector partners almost weekly to carry out this work, and they've been doing that for 7+ years. The Behavioral Health Collaborative has made a lot of progress towards reducing unnecessary response by police for behavioral health calls by building a menu of different diversion opportunities. We have embedded behavioral health clinicians at 911. We've been supporting and working with the 988 helpline. We've been expanding behavioral health training for Baltimore City police officers through crisis intervention training, and I want to note that the number of CIT trained officers continues to grow. The latest numbers I got from BPD shows 28% of officers are currently trained in CIT. The previous hearing, we talked a lot about mobile crisis expansion, since the consent decree, the city has grown their mobile crisis services. We now have 8 call types that are coded for behavioral health and can be diverted, including calls for youth as young as 12. And through the GBRICS partnership, 3 mobile crisis providers can respond to behavioral health calls throughout Baltimore. This is important progress, and there continues to be opportunities to improve the mobile crisis service system. But what I really would like to take the time today to share with you all is another important gap that we see within our system. As part of our extensive QA/QI process, we have meetings where we review Sentinel cases, we review data trends and calls that were missed opportunities for diversion. And through all of this work, the collaborative has identified that in our ecosystem, there is a gap for more preventative models that engage with individuals before situations become a medical or safety emergency. We have a number of options for when someone is in an emergency, but we don't have necessarily is a coordinated safety net for people who have yet to meet that critical point of crisis service. So the city has been exploring models. We'll hear about some of them today. Some of these programs have different names, alternative response or civilian response. But no matter the name, what these teams are non-law enforcement teams that can intervene with compassion and support for that individual. We know that each jurisdiction is unique, and so while the collaborative has explored different examples, what we'll hear about today, what's happening in some other cities, we've been taking those lessons into the next phases of our work with the Behavioral Health Collaborative in building something that fits Baltimore, our people, and the needs that we have here. So I'm excited to share a little bit of what that work has looked like. With the support of agencies across city government and with partners in the Behavioral Health Collaborative, we're working to build out what our response network looks like to include a 24/7 comprehensive safety net of services. So this isn't just a response, but it's a whole network of different services that address upstream factors that contribute to behavioral health crises in our city by connecting individuals to services that address chronic health needs and the social determinants of health that can help support the success of the various interventions that we have. Through this, the key components identified here on your screen, it's a 24/7 comprehensive safety net of services that ensure the right response for each call for assistance, including filling that gap that we have in our ecosystem. This will reduce unnecessary use of emergency services And we'll make sure that, again, there is the right response for each type of call. And then that it's not just an episodic response, but that we have the continuity to continue to engage with individuals past that first engagement. To stand up this work, I want to note that we have secured $15 million from the Opioid Restitution Fund, and we're continuing to work with key partners to refine this model, including through our regular meetings with the Behavioral Health Collaborative. Lastly, I want to acknowledge that while we continue to build up and build out, we have to make sure that we are building something that can sustain. These initiatives of the consent decree and the collaborative are big systems changes. They are working to change policy, they're working to change services and how they're delivered, and to change minds and attitudes of how we deal with people that have these behavioral health needs and how we support them. But as we continue to grow, we need continued partnership and investment. One key piece of the sustainability of all of these services, as the council president mentioned, is workforce, building out the staff to provide these really essential services. At the center of this work are really two key groups.
If you could wrap
it up.
Sentence.
Peers and behavioral health staff. We've done some work around peers. There's been an additional $8 million in ORF funds to support peer workforce, but for behavioral health clinicians, we definitely need more of that. And you'll hear more opportunities of what that can look like today. I want to close out again by saying thank you and by saying that we encourage both audience members and the council to engage with the Behavioral Health Collaborative. Our next public meeting is January 27th, and we hope that you can come.
Thank you, Director Whaley. Appreciate the work that you're doing. Glad you left Bloomberg to come hang out with us. Appreciate you. Colleagues, what I'm going to do is, out of respect for Chief Andrews' time, I'm going to go through our first 4 speakers before we ask questions. So if you could just take notes, write down your questions, and be prepared then. Next up, we're going to hear from Krista Taylor, Executive Director of Behavioral Health System Baltimore, who will explain the recommendations for improved crisis response that BHSB has offered after our last hearing. Krista, Director Taylor, the mic is yours.
Great. Thank you for having me and BHSB here today and giving us a chance to speak about those recommendations that we made following the hearing in August. So BHSB, we're a nonprofit organization that serves as a local behavioral health authority for Baltimore City. We partner with Baltimore City and the state to oversee and manage the public behavioral health system. In that role, we procure and manage funding for service delivery. We advocate for change that is needed. We collaborate with the city and other stakeholders to build local partnerships and coordinate efforts, and we educate the public on how to access care. As Director Whaley mentioned, actually, you didn't mention, I'm sorry, a framework that we use to help guide our system development is from SAMHSA, is called the Crisis Now model, and that looks at someone to call, someone to respond, and somewhere to go. In addition to the framework, we have several guiding principles that have also developed over time. Help should be available for anyone at any time and anywhere. We're striving for a multi-layered system that provides a safety net of care for anyone, whenever and wherever they need it. People may not always recognize or voice information that indicates there's a behavioral health crisis. Because of this, a variety of emergency, urgent, and non-urgent services should be available, and not all of those services are behavioral health specific. We want to build out a system that relieves police and fire from work that is better done somewhere else. And this work requires a variety of skill sets and spans many systems. It's critical that coordination happens between the various partners like police, EMS, and behavioral health providers, and that there is collective accountability. And since this is multi-system work that involves people's lives, it requires intentional and intensive coordination. It deserves time and attention to planning and the right kind of implementation plan. 911, which has been in place since the 1960s, is a number everyone knows to call for immediate help, which is typically police, fire, and ambulance. Over time, 911 has turned into a safety net for things that do not require law enforcement, firefighting, or emergency medical care. Nationally, this was recognized, and in 2022, 988 was created as a centralized number for people to call for immediate counseling and connection to resources. 988 counselors stay on the phone with people for as long as needed to determine next steps and link people directly to care, and they make follow-up calls for care coordination. In Baltimore, 91% of the calls to 988 are resolved on the phone. Although each line has a distinct and different purpose, the lines must be interconnected to ensure a comprehensive and coordinated response to people in need. In Baltimore City, our 988 helpline responds to over 4,000 calls a month. We divert calls from 911 to 988. We have clinicians in the 911 call center to identify opportunities for diversion, and we have a structure for community engagement to promote calling 988 as an alternative to 911. To determine a response, 911 quickly assesses the situation and deploys police, fire, and EMS. Mobile crisis services are a 24/7 intensive response for a behavioral health identified need and are deployed through 988. Teams are staffed by a clinician and a peer and provide community-based in-person assessment, counseling, and connection to ongoing care. To ensure accountability, BHSB regularly monitors the capacity of mobile crisis response. Baltimore City meets state standards, and data documenting this is publicly available on BHSB's website. Director Whaley talked about the consent decree process and how progress is monitored through the Behavioral Health Collaborative, and this is more accountability information also mentioned by Director Whaley. The work of the Behavioral Health Collaborative has led to the identification of two overarching opportunities. First, the limited workforce is a longstanding challenge. There's a behavioral health workforce shortage. That has been regularly documented and discussed at national and state level. Sorry, I didn't advance the slides. This workforce shortage is felt more acutely in high-intensity community-based work like crisis response. Limited workforce directly impacts mobile response capacity. There is opportunity to develop strategies for recruiting clinicians into this work. And secondly, civilian response services would further enhance the existing safety net currently through Baltimore's emergency response system. There we go. Loan repayment programs and residency programs are two things that may increase the number of people working in behavioral health crisis response. Forming a work group would be a good first step in exploring the feasibility of these potential enhancements. Civilian response services are a non-police, non-fire, or EMS response for people calling 911. This is immediate emergency support for nonviolent, non-medical calls, things like public intoxication, wellness checks, or loitering. Civilian teams could provide assessment, de-escalation, conflict resolution, and resource connection. Civilian response services are not behavioral health specific. A civilian responder could find that there are behavioral health issues that surface and then work with the person to get them connected to resources in the community, which may include calling 988 and the deployment of a mobile crisis team. Civilian response services would be one component of the multi-layered safety net of care that Baltimore is striving for. This is a visual to show you where civilian response could fit into our system, a team of trained community responders deployed through 911. Baltimore City's continuous services will be improved by adding civilian response teams that are dispatched directly from 911. We've heard consistently from community that they do not want a police response for mental health emergencies or nonviolent situations. Over-reliance on law enforcement leads to unintended consequences and high costs. Many 911 calls that currently require law enforcement could be resolved without their involvement. In addition, EMS is too often the first point of engagement for what is a non-emergent medical concern. We need to reserve police, fire, and EMS for emergency services. We also need to reserve the expertise of a behavioral health clinician for when a behavioral health specific intervention is needed, like someone actively experiencing psychotic symptoms or expressing self-harm and is disconnected from treatment. In Baltimore, we have a lot of strengths to build from. We have commitment, we have partnership, and we have a solid emergency response infrastructure. It's important that we take the time needed to plan and think through the nuances for how civilian response services fit into the broader ecosystem. Starting with a pilot and then expanding when we have fidelity to the pilot model would help with this. I'm happy to be here tonight with the city and with the experts you've gathered so we can learn from others. So thank you.
Thank you, Director. Much appreciated. All right. We are honored to have Tahir Duckett, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Innovations in Community Safety from Georgetown Law. Tahir. Yes, you do.
Yes, I've got this one here. Yes. All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Tahir Duckett. I'm the Executive Director at Georgetown Law's Center for Innovations in Community Safety. I'm also an adjunct professor there, and we work with jurisdictions to help develop a more modern community safety infrastructure. For the past several years, we have partnered with alternative response programs across the country on research, policy development, technical assistance, and convenings. I would like to start, if you would indulge me, with just a touch of history, because I am a professor, after all. Up until the 1960s, if you had a heart attack or if you got into a car accident, the emergency response that you could expect was dramatically different from what you'd expect today. Emergency medical services might be provided by police, directly by hospitals, fire departments, volunteer groups, or even undertakers. There was no standardization for emergency response training really until the Freedom House Ambulance Service was launched by civil rights organizers in Pittsburgh in 1967, largely because police were the responders who provided ambulatory services in Pittsburgh at the time. 911 doesn't even launch until later, until 1968. And I start with this because so much of what we take for granted about our emergency response ecosystem is actually relatively new, and it's rapidly changing. And so we shouldn't be surprised to see jurisdictions across the nation continuing to make significant changes to ensure that emergency response better meets the needs of residents. So what are the emergency response needs of Baltimore residents? One thing that we see nationwide is that in addition to clearly criminal violent matters like homicides and carjackings, robberies, that there are a substantial number of calls or officer-initiated encounters that involve mental health, extreme poverty, substance use, or low-level conflict. Think about someone experiencing homelessness who falls asleep in a McDonald's, or someone wandering down the sidewalk shouting at cars, someone playing loud music on a Tuesday night, someone who starts to talk to their parents about hurting themselves. Now, the last of these are the bread and butter of our crisis response system, right? BCRI should be able to handle over the phone or deploy a mobile crisis team if necessary, and they're a critical element of our system. We absolutely need those responders. But those first four, those are the kinds of calls that mobile crisis teams typically are not optimized for or scaled for. And that's a real problem because it's a significant chunk of the things that we ask police officers to deal with every day. In a jurisdiction the size of Baltimore, we'd expect this to amount to tens of thousands of 911 calls each year, in addition to officer-initiated encounters at a minimum. And a quick glance at the 2024 Baltimore City 911 call data gives me no reason to doubt that expectation. We've got around 60,000 calls classified as disorderly, around 20,000 for well checks, 15,000 for family disturbances, 10,000 for noise complaints, 1,700 identified as behavioral crisis. Now, I need to be clear. I'm not saying that all of these calls definitely need to be handled by community responders in Baltimore. But these are the call types that in other jurisdictions we found oftentimes contain a lot of calls that don't require a badge, a gun, and handcuffs to resolve. To know with a higher degree of granularity, you need a deeper analysis, one that I believe is already underway as part of a partnership between MONSE and some of our friends at the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. But there are also encouraging signs from the report published by Greg Majette in 2024, which found, among other things, that fewer than 1% of disorderly calls involved a Part 1 crime, right? A shorthand for serious crimes like homicide, rape, robbery, larceny, auto theft. Police only take a report in about 8.5% of disorderly calls. And so that suggests to me that there's a lot in here where police may not be required. And so what do model programs look like? Here's a sample of 3 leading programs from across the nation that look to take a significant number of calls off the plate of their respective police departments, ranging from around 1,000 calls a month to 3,000 calls a month, and with budgets ranging from $6 million a year to around $18 million a year. If I had more space, I would have added Denver up here. Andrew, please don't get mad at me, but he is here to tell you more about their approach. What do these successful programs have in common? One, direct dispatch from 911. 911 can deploy these responders just like they would police, fire, or EMS. They're geo-tracked, they've got radios. 911 knows where they are at any given time, and if they need help, they radio for it, just like police would. And the reality is that as of right now, 911 is this number that most people know, and you really want to have a no wrong door approach here. 2, sufficient scale and seriousness. If these programs are out of sight, they're out of mind. If you don't operate a program at a scale where responders are seen as reliable, police won't hand off calls to them. 911 dispatchers will stop trying to deploy them, and the community won't develop the kind of trust that you need for the program to succeed. That also means trusting program leadership and not necessarily thinking of that leadership as secondary to police, fire, or EMS. Third, and we're seeing this across the country, you don't need police responders for the vast majority of the community response calls. And so you have to prioritize building out community response and not necessarily defaulting to co-response as an option. Co-response is expensive. You need both police and the either clinician or the community responder. And so you want to prioritize community response and really think of co-response as a backup plan. One thing that's not up here that I should have put up here is thinking appropriately about the kind of workforce that you need. None of those programs I mentioned earlier are hiring solely graduate clinicians, and that's a really limited resource. Just very, very, very briefly.
Very, very briefly.
There are some differences in approaches, and I could talk a little bit more about these in the questions, but there are structural decisions, there are decisions around priority call types, and then there's decisions around the scope of follow-up and case management. I love what you put up there in terms of what y'all are building, and so that case management piece is really key. But you'll see different places where programs live. That's okay. It's okay to have different kinds of locations, standalone city agencies within existing city departments, contract agencies, et cetera. So I'll stop there. Happy to take additional questions.
Thank you so much, Director Duckett. We really appreciate you coming to Baltimore. Thank you for working with my staff and the work you're doing with MONSE as well. Really, really appreciate the information that you provide and the national perspective. Next up, we have Chief Patrice Andrews. Hey, Chief Andrews, good to see you.
Good evening.
Good evening. Chief Andrews is the chief of the Durham Police Department. She will speak about Durham HEART, which dispatches non-law enforcement responders to certain 911 calls, in some cases with, as Tahir said, with co-responders. Chief, the floor is yours, and I don't know if you can see it, but we got a 7-minute clock, so rock and roll.
All right, here I go. So good evening. My name is Patrice Andrews. I'm the Chief of Police of the City of Durham Police Department in Durham, North Carolina, and I am proud to be a part of this critical work. So HEART started in 2021 in the city of Durham. And as Director Duckett so eloquently kind of went through, there was a lot of research that was conducted to really find out how many calls actually qualified to have a law enforcement officer to respond, and how many calls were kind of low-level trespassing, low-level quality of life calls. And so what we found was that there was plenty to go around for our newly formed HART. And so city manager Wanda Page had the audacity to stand up and start HART. Director Ryan Smith was quickly brought on, and the process began. I came back to Durham in November of 2021, and from that point forward, Director Smith and I, we met every week. Our teams met every week as we began to build out what this system was going to look like. We knew that we had to really gather and get the buy-in from the troops, from the officers, and that buy-in really does start from the top. And so we arranged to have a very transparent system of informational sessions in which officers would come in during their training time and actually meet with Director Smith and his team and really unpack what HART was and what HART is not. And at the end of it, you still had officers that were very kind of wait and see. There were more officers that were more relieved to know that this was not a replacement for a police officer. This was not a part of a defund movement. This was a part of what officers have always known, is that we are not equipped to handle every single call that comes out, specifically calls where we don't have the skills or the resources to be able to provide a holistic response and approach in order to better serve that person that's in crisis. So our teams, after having those meetings with our entire sworn staff, we began to debrief every week. So we had a co-response team, and that co-response team was made of a police officer that was already a part of our crisis intervention unit. So we had a standalone team, and then it was made of a clinician. And we would debrief, we would talk about what was going right, what wasn't going so well, and then we would come up with solutions, and we would keep officers abreast of what was happening every step of the way. We had to figure out what calls were going to either be diverted through our 911 center. So that was the crisis call diversion. We also had community response teams. Those were solely unarmed responders, clinicians that were going to respond to calls that did not require co-response. You've heard me talk about co-response was a police officer and a clinician, and we've recently added our involuntary commitment response team. So it's our IRT, as we call it. And so we have continued to grow. There was a lot of fear around, well, the clinicians are going to go out there and get themselves hurt. And very quickly, that was, we were able to thankfully disprove a lot of the unfounded fears that people had around being unarmed and going out into the community. And we continue to be very proud of the fact that we have proven that our community is our community, and we can go out and work, and our clinicians can go out and work in such a way that they are safe. We did put certain structures in place to ensure their safety. They are trained on our radios. They are provided the option to wear a bullet-resistant vest. They have just about all of the same equipment that law enforcement that we have, with the exception, obviously, of certain, taser, gun, badge, that kind of thing. We began to build trust, and that was very clear in a lot of the surveys that we have done since the development of HART and co-response and all the things. And we were able to, one by one, to really address some of the key concerns by not just our officers, but also the people that we were serving in the community, because the members of the community were very sold on the fact that the only people that were a fit for the job is the police. And so we've also had to go out and talk to our community members. Ryan and I, as a team, as a united front, our team members that work with us, they are also a united front. It is one band, one sound. And we have not been deterred, and we continue to build upon the work that we're doing. We recently completed a podcast called the Fifth Branch that talks much more and goes more in depth, including officer testimonials about Heart and about the work that Heart was doing and has been doing. And now there are times where I am driving home or driving to work or driving here or there, and I can actually hear officers call out and ask for the assistance of Heart. And so it has been, in a nutshell, just a very refreshing movement in the city of Durham. It wasn't always easy. There were a lot of obstacles and hurdles that we had to overcome, but mostly we had to really be steadfast in our commitment that this work is essential. It is critical, that you can have both. You can have law enforcement and you can have responders that are there to holistically serve our community in a way that police officers just simply don't have and aren't equipped to do that. So I hope that I have, in a nutshell, provided a little more information, but I will stay around for any questions.
Thank you so much, Chief Andrews. Really appreciate you joining us virtually. Also just want to appreciate how you have wrapped your arms around the Durham Heart program. I think what it shows is that it really has to be a citywide, comprehensive approach to achieve the kind of success that you all are achieving. Slight program edit. I am going to have, due to some timing issues, our last three folks finish it up before we open to colleague questions. I'm going to go right now also online to Andrew Demeron, who is the director of Denver's 911 system. He will address the many steps needed to enable the 911 system to triage calls and dispatch the right responders, including civilian responders, to address the many different types of calls made to their 911 system. Mr. Demeron, Director Demeron, you are on, sir.
All right, perfect. I've got my 7-minute timer on my phone here, so I'll try and maintain that.
Thank you.
Council President, members of council, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you. And it's also really fun to get to
Director,
go
if you could move slightly closer to your microphone, we're having a little hearing trouble.
Is this a little bit better?
A little bit better, yeah, just speak loud.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll get right up on that microphone.
There you go.
All right.
We'll give you 20 seconds back. How about that?
Perfect. Well, it's also wonderful to get to speak after so many wonderful folks who are kind of leading in this space. I haven't had the opportunity to work with Director Krista Taylor, but when she was giving her talk, I was going, yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. So I'm going to be kind of piggybacking off of some of the stuff that she and Tahir have said. As just a brief background of STAR, in the city of Denver, we started a co-responder program in 2016 where we had clinicians riding with police officers. And in the years after, a couple of things started to happen simultaneously. First, we were getting a lot of community voices that were asking for a non-law enforcement civilian-only response. And at the same time, the clinicians who were riding with the police officers were coming back and saying, we're going to a lot of calls where we don't need the police officer. We're community mental health workers. We do this kind of work all day, every day. We could be doing this on our own. So the work really began to create what would eventually become STAR, which launched in June of 2020. So for my part, and kind of what I think I was asked to provide some information on is what that looks like within the 911 system in Denver. Tahir spoke about kind of Freedom House and the invention of the modern emergency medical response system. And it did predate 911. However, given the sort of glacial pace of progress in this country sometimes. It was well into the 70s before a lot of communities had a working EMS system. And so it was routine that folks would dial 911 and report a medical emergency and they'd get a police response. So we had to build a better rocket ship by creating what is now standard in EMS. And I view what communities like Durham and Seattle and Denver, Albuquerque and Baltimore are doing as kind of the next evolution of that, right? Where we have substance misuse, we've got resource needs, we've got mental health and behavioral health, and we've been asking our law enforcement partners to kind of be all things to all people. So in Denver, the approach that we have taken is we view STAR as the fourth field response option available to our dispatchers. So that means every call that comes through Denver 911, we are triaging the exact same way. We are identifying certain criteria. We need your address first, and then we need to know what's happening so that we can kind of categorize it. Every 911 system has problem nature or nature codes. These are the categories in which we place calls for service. And we have a list of 10 that are eligible for the STAR program. And as long as there are no additional scene safety concerns, criminal activity, use of a weapon, right? Not just the presence of a weapon, because anybody who works with our unhoused neighbors knows that everybody's got a knife or something on them. So is the presence of a weapon one thing, but are they actually brandishing it? That's the delineation that we try to make. And then we try to prioritize the dispatch of STAR. The idea being that STAR is the default responder until we have to escalate response to police or escalate response to an ambulance, that sort of thing. One of the projects that we are currently working on, again, Denver is one of those cities where our civilian response program or alternative response program was kind of born out of diversion from police. There are other cities that look at it as a diversion from the medical response system, San Francisco being a perfect example. And what we are doing is still looking at these programs as a reference to the original responder, be that police or paramedics. And so what we are trying to do is separate it out, professionalize it, and establish it as its own thing. So we have established a citywide radio channel for the STAR teams. I am working very, very hard, given city budgets in this day and age, to get the funding required to create a dedicated dispatch team for the STAR program. Today, what happens is those calls go to our police dispatchers, and the police dispatchers are the ones that we are entrusting with prioritizing STAR when possible. Whereas what we need is a dedicated dispatch team with their own tools, with their own policies and procedures and training, so that we can not only ensure we're sending STAR to the maximum number of calls possible, but that we are providing any additional resources that we have. The final thing that I will touch on, and it sounds like some of this has been discussed, Denver's approach to then what happens after these teams respond, right? STAR exists to de-escalate the crisis in that moment, provide the resource need in that moment, but then what do we do, again, going back to SAMHSA's intercept model, to ensure that there isn't a subsequent 911 call for that individual? And what we have done is, I mentioned those community voices that were asking for a civilian response option. We have partnered with many of them in the form of a cohort of community nonprofits for wraparound services post-call. So we have a group of community nonprofits that we then, the teams on the van, will refer clients to, and then they can, this larger group can provide geographically appropriate, linguistically appropriate, culturally appropriate wraparound services and support from that point on. So that's, I went as quickly as I could. I think I beat the 7-minute time, but I will also stick around for any questions.
Thank you so much, Director. We really appreciate you joining us all the way from Denver across the country. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Melissa Buckley. She is the chair and associate professor for the Department of Social Work at Coppin State University. Director Buckley will address BHSB's recommendation that we offer a loan repayment program to attract social workers to join field-based response efforts. Dr. Buckley, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I think it's so ironic that you have given the directive about the time restraints, but I love you, friend. All right, so good evening to the entire City Council and to the members of the public. I appreciate this opportunity to be here. My name is Melissa Buckley. I am the chair of the Department of Social Work at Coppin State University, and I also get to serve as our executive director of our Dorothy Heights Center for the Advancement of Social Justice. And I'm also a practicing clinician. I am a therapist. And so I share this to provide some context as to why this issue is important to me personally, why it matters to me. So as a licensed practitioner and as an educator, with all the different hats that I wear, I see on a very frontline basis the crisis that we are facing on a day-to-day basis. Just a few days ago, even though it has since been reversed, when SAMHSA, when all of the funding was cut, it's been restored, but we know that, that our community is at risk. And not only do we know it, but my students know this too. Not just my students, but students who are in the pipelines at all of our universities here in Baltimore. And so I really understand on a personal basis what happens when systems are not equipped to respond to emotional distress and crisis. And so I'm here in strong support of Baltimore City's continued efforts to build a community-centered, best-in-class crisis response system, one that encourages the right response at the right time by the right professionals. Baltimore has already demonstrated national leadership in this area as the first city in the nation to legislate a trauma-informed approach to governance. Baltimore made a clear statement that healing, prevention, and equity must guide how we respond to harm and crisis. So the work that we are talking about today is a natural extension of that commitment. And as each of my colleagues here were sharing their remarks, I was like, yes, exactly, true. So we have this really incredible interdisciplinary understanding of the issue, and so we just now need to make it do what it do. The recommendation before you rightly acknowledges that our current system relies too heavily on emergency medical services, on police, and even though it's extremely encouraging to hear from our chief and other law enforcement officials like her, we know that they are simply not equipped. They are not trained to respond to these emotional and social needs. These are situations where a community-based civilian response is not only appropriate, but it's more effective and it is more humane. Equally critical is the workforce reality. Baltimore City is designated as a mental health professional shortage area, but this challenge does not exist in isolation. Maryland and the nation are facing a projected shortage of behavioral health professionals through at least 2030, which is right around the corner, driven by workforce attrition, increasing demand, and limited pipelines into community-based care. So what is important to name is that the next generation of social workers is already stepping into this work. Our students are preparing for crisis response, trauma-informed care, de-escalation, and community-based intervention. Many are already serving Baltimore communities while completing their degrees. They are not waiting to be invited into the solution. They are actively seeking pathways into it. Universities and social work programs are therefore not just training sites, we are workforce partners. With intentional investments, such as loan repayment initiatives, residency-style training pathways developed in partnership with academic institutions, and well-supported civilian response roles, Baltimore can retain emerging professionals who are deeply committed to serving this city. A civilian emergency response model paired with sustainable workforce development allows us to reduce unnecessary systemic involvement. It will allow us to support first responders in focusing on their core responsibilities and ensure that people in crisis receive care that is timely, that is appropriate, and grounded in dignity. This is a public safety issue. It's a public health issue, and it's a workforce sustainability issue. But above all, it's a values issue. Baltimore has already shown the courage to lead, and this moment invites us to continue doing so. Thank you so much for your time and for listening to my testimony.
Thank you so much, Dr. Buckley. And as my friend over here would have me say, thank you for living in the 14th district.
Yes.
We appreciate you. All right, last fabulous 14th district, yes. Last but not least, Fariha Waheed chairs the city's Trauma-Informed Care Task Force. She works in our school system. Fariha, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Council President, council members, and members of the administration. I want to start off by saying I know it's after 5 p.m. and I'm the last expert testimony here, so I'm going to try to keep my remarks under 5 minutes. So thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Fariha Waheed, and I am here as a Baltimore resident, a civic leader, and a voice for people who have experienced our crisis response system, not as it is intended, but as it actually shows up in moments of vulnerability. Baltimore does not lack compassion. What we lack is a crisis response system that consistently meets people with care, dignity, and the right kind of help at the right moment. I am here before you today because I have personally experienced a moment where that system failed. During a health crisis, I encountered a first responder whose approach escalated fear rather than de-escalating harm. There was no trauma-informed engagement, no meaningful assessment of emotional state, and no sense that the goal was actually safety and stability. What should have been support felt punitive. What should have been care felt like control. I share this not to blame individual first responders who are doing extraordinarily difficult work, but rather to name a structural systemic failure. We are asking systems and professionals to handle crises they were never designed, trained, or resourced to address. When crisis response defaults to law enforcement alone, especially for behavioral health crises, substance use, or emotional distress, we create outcomes that are misaligned with safety, misaligned with healing, and misaligned with trust. And for Black residents, disabled people, and people that have prior trauma, the stakes of that mismatch are even higher. This is why Baltimore must expand and truly deliver on a modern, trauma-informed crisis response system. As you have heard today, other cities have shown us what is possible. Durham and Denver, for example, they have invested in a crisis response model that pairs behavioral health clinicians with emergency response, prioritizing de-escalation, stability, and connection to care. Their model recognizes that not every 911 call requires a badge, but many require clinical expertise, cultural humility, and crisis navigation. But let me be clear, Baltimore should not simply copy another city's approach. Our city has unique needs, unique histories, and community dynamics. We carry deep generational trauma, but also deep community wisdom. A Baltimore-specific solution must be co-designed with residents, clinicians, advocates, and first responders. It must reflect neighborhood realities, gaps in behavioral health infrastructure, and the lived experiences of people who actually call for help. This means investing not just in pilots, but in a sustainable citywide crisis response ecosystem, one that includes non-police crisis responders, clear dispatch protocols so the right responders arrive first, strong coordination between 911, 988, health providers and community organizations, and of course, ongoing evaluation and accountability. It also means funding this work at a level that signals seriousness, not as a side initiative, but as core public safety infrastructure. I want the council and the administration to know this call is not coming from me alone. I speak with the backing of the Trauma-Informed Care Task Force, which is a really powerful cross-sector group of community leaders practitioners, and advocates who understand both the human cost of inadequate crisis response and the opportunity before us. There's a broad agreement, not just in this room, but moreover in the broader community, that Baltimore is ready and long overdue for a system that responds to crisis with care rather than punishment, and with skill rather than fear. So my ask today is clear. I urge the administration to commit meaningful investment to expanding Baltimore's crisis response capacity in true partnership with the communities most impacted. I urge the council to continue exercising oversight and to treat this as a moral, public health, and public safety priority. A city is judged not by how it responds when things are easy, but by how it shows up when residents are at their most vulnerable. Baltimore can do better. Baltimore must do better. And with intention, your investment, and your partnership, Baltimore will do better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fariha. Appreciate your work and your words. All right, we are now going to go to questions. Colleagues, if we could just do one as a first round and then go from there. Let's jump right in. Councilman Jones?
Yes. My question is for Chief Andrews. You mentioned, you spoke about trust earlier. My question is, what's been the most important factors in building trust and collaboration between your department and the Community Safety Department?
Chief.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Nope, you're good. I was going to say if you use the raise hand function, but you're all set. Sorry about that.
Okay. Oh, no worries. Thank you. Great question. So what I have found is that there has to be a willingness to be very transparent with each other. And that means when we come together and we meet and we debrief and we talk about certain situations, or if we have to change policy and procedure, that everyone that comes to the table has that spirit of transparency and being very open and honest, but also willing to be collaborative. And so that's something that we had to grow very early on, but that does in itself help to grow that trust, knowing that we can come together and say the things that we need to say and also see some action behind it as well.
And just as a follow-up, how long did that take to build approximately, do you feel like?
I would say probably 2 years.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Councilman. Councilmember Ramos?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks to all of our speakers. It's, you know, I think we've got some models that we can really look to get this right. We all care very much about our residents and don't like seeing them in crisis, and of course don't like seeing them not getting the care that they need. So I had a question about, for Baltimore, for our folks, what is, I mean, I think we have to start over, right? In terms of trying to get to where we see in Durham and in Denver, or are we coming up with this same model of being able to have clinicians that are immediately dispatched from the 911 system? Is that where we're going? Because otherwise, the reason I'm asking is because if that's where we're going, which I think is where I think we want to go, then what is it you need? How do we do this? What's going on? Like, can we do this? And I think that's important, you know, or are we developing a different model?
Can I start and then turn to you for some of the detail? It's not starting over, it's building from. We have such a core infrastructure and we need to build from. What we're talking about is adding that non-clinician response to a wider variety of calls and then really preserving the clinician for what a clinician is needed for. How we get there and what it's gonna take, I'm gonna turn to Director Whaley, who's been from what she's presented, really working more on that detail, but really want to emphasize that it's not starting over. It really is building from and building a multi-layered ecosystem where everything's interconnected and we have the right care by the right professional at the right time in the right place.
And I'll absolutely echo that. I don't think we're starting from scratch. A lot of what has been built and is being built is really aligned with these models that we've heard about and other models that we haven't heard about today. And I'll start with what's been built so far. So the embedded clinicians in our 911 call center are really important for triaging and figuring out who is the right team to go out. And we have, we talk about diversion as like a singular thing, but it's multifaceted, and we have many diversion options in the city. And so similar to I think some of the other models, there's co-response teams. So where an armed officer can go out with a behavioral health clinician, we have that in the city already. In the Central District, those are the CRT teams. And then we have the mobile crisis teams, which are clinicians that can be dispatched. We also have the CIT trained officers that are trained in behavioral health. So if it is a safety issue, there's a team that has further training outside of the other BPD officers to respond with more compassion and like that specified training. I think the component that we're missing is what we've talked about as the alternative response team. That's not necessarily a clinical person. What we have looked at from other models and what we've seen be really successful is peer and case manager teams that can go out and respond to some of these lower acuity calls, things like somebody sleeping on a bench or someone in traffic, things like that, that are not the violent safety issues or a medical emergency. So I think that's where we're trying to look at a team, and all of this starts at the triage in 911 with a behavioral health clinician. So I think we have a lot of the components, and it's filling in with that alternative civilian team that in the model that we have been working to build out, that I showed that little concept, is connected to a team of folks. So the behavioral health clinician at 911 is connected so that when a team is dispatched, they have access to that behavioral health clinician. And then we've also, in our concept, are building out access to telemedicine, which is something that we, I think is unique to what we're envisioning in Baltimore City. We've heard from the embedded clinicians at 911 that a lot of folks are calling in because they don't have a script or their script has lapsed. And so they're using EMS to get to the ED just for a prescription that they could theoretically connect with someone via telemedicine to help fill in. So that would alleviate some of the burden on our response teams. And then the continuity, the follow-up care. So once an individual enters into this system, this safety net system, they're continued to follow up so we don't see subsequent calls from them.
I guess I know that we're probably not talking specifics, but we have two cases, well, one particular case where it was a police response and the person ended up dying. And there were no clinicians out there. There were no, like, why is it not working if we're still seeing that? I have a constituent that I continue to talk about, I'm not gonna talk about it publicly, but that he still has not gotten the care that he needs. We have people who are experiencing homelessness that often have crisis, and homeless services needs to be able to call. Like, we're not seeing it. We're not seeing it. And so it's a little frustrating when, 3-4 years ago, we asked for money to make sure that BCRI was able to do this response. That the money was there, I don't know where it went, but I know that they used it for increased capacity, but it wasn't a full-on model that we're trying to work on. What I'm saying is we're not seeing this on the ground, and so I don't know whether you need us to help tell people you can do this and we'll make sure, or if there's more resources that are needed for the crisis responders? Like, I'm just telling you, you're telling me that it's happening and I'm not seeing it happen.
So the alternative response team, the gap that you're seeing is the gap that we see and the gap that we are trying to solve for right now.
But that's
with
not, the crises that I'm talking about seem to need a clinician, not a non-clinician. I'm not a doctor, so obviously, or a social worker, so I may not know what I'm talking about. But it just seems to me like those responses actually needed a clinical response, or should have had a clinical response. What you're asking, and what I'm understanding, is that you're asking to try to get more of a non-clinical response.
That team would be connected to clinical responder or to a clinical team. Because I think what I'm hearing, and I think I know the examples that you're talking about, there are some where where it is kind of more of a crisis situation. And I think one of the opportunities that we continue to see that we need to evolve in is improving response times and having the appropriate team go. And so that's still something that we're building while also trying to fill a gap. So I want to acknowledge and hear that there's still room for improvement with the teams that we have. And then I think there's also this gap that a new team could solve for.
Right, so the other piece of this is when we're asking what do you need, it's not necessarily the positions, but how much is it going to cost? What are the partnerships that we need to have? Is it working with the social work schools? Like, what is it that you need so that we can be partners in helping? We're not asking everybody to do this on their own. We want to be a part of this because we're seeing it, so that's what I'm trying to get at too.
And Director, if I could just follow up with my colleague, because I think she's spot on, which is, I think the sentiment that we've experienced is a system that is fragmented, that lacks capacity to effectively respond when someone is in crisis. We have seen it play out this last year, time and time again. We held a previous hearing that was less, I would say, solution-oriented and more about just, this is the problem that we're having. And so I deeply appreciate the work that you are doing and the opioid restitution fund and trying to build the plane and fly it. But I do want to just acknowledge that I think we are a far ways away from what we heard tonight from Durham, from Denver, what Director Duckett suggested, and what Fariha and Dr. Buckley suggested, which is, I think what folks are looking for is when I call 911, when I call 988, that there is someone, a clinician, a peer, someone who can meet the need that I am having that can respond quickly. And when we heard in the last hearing that it can take an hour and a half for a team to come out, and then that's not even like on the high end, that's just unacceptable. And so I think what the push that you're hearing from my colleague that I'm gonna completely concur with is the level of intentionality that we heard from the chief in Durham, where it is clearly so integrated between police and the non-police response, where the city of Durham has clearly wrapped its arms around a singular solution, which is HEART. That's what we're looking for here in Baltimore, and I think it's what Baltimoreans deserve and what we've seen succeed in other places. Councilmember, you want to follow up one more time, or are you good?
Yeah, I'm just, again, if we don't have the specific answers around what the dollars are and what the resources are and what the partnerships are, because I'm asking to be able to be entered into this conversation to help. And so we, want to make, if it is resources, what is it? What is it? Obviously, you said you've got 15 million from the, it's still not enough. So what are those other partnerships that we can, but also educating us on what, we're seeing with the Durham and Denver examples, sort of the end goal here. And I honestly, had an idea of what the end goal would be. Now I really understand it. So I think we definitely want to be helpful. So it's just a matter of like, what is it that you need? Tell us what it is so that we can help.
I have a long list that I won't list all tonight, but you put it out there. So yeah, And I would also just encourage the council to come to the collaborative meetings. I think this is an opportunity for the public and the council and others to share the things, their experiences in a system that is still growing. Not perfect by any means, but I do think that through the collaborative, there is a lot of intention and partnership between the city, the administration, fire, police, BHSB, working towards that and looking for continued opportunity to improve. And I think this is where we can iterate on the concept that the city is proposing, that is that centralized program that we see with HEART and we see with Denver Star. There is a concept of a proposal for the city, and I think what we are doing right now is socializing that concept with key city partners, both within the agencies and community-based partners as well, because I forget who said it, but we can't be everything to everyone. And I've heard that from police, I've heard it from CBOs. If we are all trying to be everything, that means that we have gaps in our system. And I think the biggest gap is us working together. And so we're working now to bring all of those folks to the table to help iterate on this concept, refine it. So when we roll it out, we're in a good place, and we'll continue to iterate on the concept as it rolls.
Thank you, Director. And again, I just want to reiterate, what you said, the spirit of partnership, that as you can see, this is an issue that the council has cared about for a very long time, that we've been in many, many conversations with our friends from BHSB and BCRI. And so look forward to being that partner to you all. Councilman Blanchard.
Thank you, Mr. President. This question, I think, would be either for Professor Duckett or for Chief Andrews. So either in Durham or in other cities that have implemented a pretty built-out system, how have you seen that impact the demand as far as like staffing manpower hours within patrol divisions and whatnot of the police and fire departments?
So I can kind of speak to that. We have seen some reduction in the amount of dedicated time that our patrol staff are actually spending going to trespassing calls and those types of identified kind of low-level quality of life concerns that we commonly see nationwide. On a broader scale, the demand for the services has grown exponentially. And so we are not yet in a model where we're 24/7, but we are moving towards that model. And I think we'll start to see a little bit more of a lighter load being lifted off of our patrol officers and our staff on those calls. But also too, we're seeing repeat people that are in repeat callers from crisis. We're starting to see more of those folks actually being connected with services. So, and that's a significant impact too for time spent.
Chief, you're kind of implying that some of the repeat callers may be getting solutions that actually allow them to not be repeat callers anymore?
Yes, thank you, yes.
Okay, thank you. Professor?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And in fact, there's a study that was released in October 2025 of HEART by Bocar Ba, B-O-C-A-R-B-A, that found that HEART was found significant reductions in crime reporting, arrests, and response times. So at least what we were seeing is folks being able to get to calls more quickly. And yeah, I had a thought that Andrew might have have an idea here too.
Thank you, Tahir. We actually just finished a multi-year study of our STAR and co-responder programs And it has not been publicly released yet, so I can't go into a ton of detail, but I can give you all a bit of a sneak peek. One of the findings was that when STAR responds to behavioral health-related 911 calls without police involvement, those who receive a STAR clinical encounter are less likely to have future police contacts or arrests in the following year compared to those who receive a police-only response on that initial call. And that's especially true with folks experiencing homelessness. So that was something that came out of this study. So we've seen similar positive impacts.
Okay. Thank you all for those answers. I guess we can't make a committee request of people who don't actually work here, but I'll be following up for maybe the data that is publicly available for everyone. Thank you.
Please do.
Yeah, we will absolutely follow up on that. Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Parker?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, everybody, for being here and for this really informative conversation this evening. After hearing about good work being done in other cities, in addition to our own, it's really glad to have the opportunity to connect with some of that. I think my first questions here are for Andrew out of Denver. I know you just referenced a new study. I have one in front of me from September of 2024, which hopefully has some still relevant information to it. Just a point of clarification real quick, because I know we got deep into it with HART in Durham. At least this study in front of me just is the STAR system a completely co-responder model of paramedic and mental health professional. That's the base model. So there's none. I know we had lots of conversation around peer things like that, but in Denver there's no current peer program.
Correct.
Okay.
Not yet.
Gotcha. Then just some specifics here. I know that at least 2023, and I'm sure it's gotten higher, feel free to update that number for us, 20% of STAR eligible calls were responded to by a STAR team. What's that number, what's that percentage in your most recent data? What percent of eligible calls?
That has not changed.
Okay, 20%. And then what I didn't see in this study was of all the calls that come to 911, what percent are deemed STAR eligible?
I see. I'd have to do some back of the napkin math. But what I can tell you is that, well, hang on, let me just, if you have a question of somebody else, let me just do a little bit of math real quick.
I appreciate it. My other question, unfortunately, was for you as well. But maybe if it's all right, with the president's discretion, I'll ask the same of Chief Andrews. Of the calls that come in to you all, what percentage of them are deemed appropriate for a response by HART?
I need to look at that really quickly. That's what I was looking up. I know that we have I do also want to just highlight, we have on the community safety dashboard for the city of Durham, for HART, there is a live dashboard that gives you data on the calls as well as the time saved since the inception of HART. I think it goes back to 2022 is when we really hunted it all the way down the field and started that. But I'm looking that up now for you.
Gotcha. Thank you. Andrew,
I might be able to help a little bit.
Oh yeah, sorry.
If you don't, yeah, if you don't mind, this doesn't actually tell you eligible, but it tells you actuals, right? So I did look up for Durham. Average number of 911 calls each month is around 21,000. They're responding to around 1,100 calls per month. I know in Albuquerque that number is 35,000 911 calls a month, and they respond to around 3,200. So in Albuquerque, it's close to 10% is what they're taking. In Durham, I know it's closer to 6%.
Andrew, do you have an eligibility percentage? You're muted right now. Andrew.
It's the challenge with virtual. You're muted. There you go.
Welcome to 2026. In 2025, we identified about 15,000 calls that were eligible for STAR. Our total incoming call volume between 911 and non-emergency was about 1.3 million.
Yeah, thank you. My final question here, and this is for Andrew, eligible, I'll just write that down. I noticed one of the things in this 2024 report talked about it showed a really helpful chart of STAR eligible calls and responses based on time of day, because it's not a 24/7 system, but does have good coverage, and I think it covered that year 94% of the eligible calls came during that time frame that the teams were up and running. I know one of the things here, and I didn't see the stats in this report, but maybe it's in this new one that's going to come out. What's the average response time for STAR calls? Because I know that's a big question here is kind of how quickly can we deploy these teams? So what does that look like for you all?
So I would have to do some digging to get that as well, and I'm happy to follow up with that. What I can say is that up until now, and this is a recent shift, response time has not been a priority of the STAR program, and that was deliberately done because we wanted to give our clinical folks the kind of freedom to determine how long they needed to stay on scene with somebody in order to de-escalate that individual and get them the support that they need. So we didn't want to create an environment where our field teams felt incentivized to just turn and burn, and we really wanted to kind of create space for them to support folks.
Okay, I appreciate that. And if it's all right, the same question then to Chief Andrews. Do you have any data on response time for your heart?
I have that. I happen to go to the, okay, so our average response time, and I did the date range from June 28, 2022 to 1/12/2026. We are averaging, so we've had 39,325 responses, heart qualified responses, and we are averaging 6.05 minutes to scene.
Wow.
So they're making it in about 6 minutes. I say heart typically stays on scene about 30 minutes. And that saves an average total of 35 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chief. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate you pulling this hearing together and having the opportunity to hear from experts in other cities and also hear a little bit about what we're already doing here in the city. This is unfortunately, I missed the first hearing. I had to be somewhere for my wife, but I appreciate you also pulling this hearing together and allowing us to have this discussion. I think, we've had a number of instances where interactions with officers have gone poorly, and I often fear like what that then means for our relationship with the community. And I think this is the kind of discussion that helps us get it right. And so I would say the urgency is incredibly high here to get this right. To that effect, I think a couple of things come to mind, and this is more of a commentary and less of a question, because I think really the work has to happen not so much in this room as back in offices and meetings to figure out what it takes to stand this up. We talked about how some of the low acuity calls will decline as we see us actually address some of the folks that are calling. We talk about this actually a lot in fire stat. Those low acuity calls that really take up a lot of our emergency response time also would probably decline as well. So both on the police and fire side, if we are able to help folks with actual crisis response that are appropriate and connect them to clinical responses that keep them out of those crisis situations, we begin to get closer to solving problems for folks as opposed to playing whack-a-mole of sorts and trying to always be in crisis mode. And so I think this, to me, should be a first step into a broader system. And I believe we have today, technically, all of the pieces that we need, but I believe we also need to make sure that we connect those pieces together. In the two instances where we've seen officers maybe over-respond and unfortunately result in someone losing their life, I think in those instances, technically the officers followed the book And I think what that tells me is that the book is not really meant for these situations, especially for officers. And it begs the question for us, how do we change the book, both for officers to maybe defer in certain instances to someone else, and have an appropriate protocol there, but then also to maybe never have an officer show up. And I think seeing the examples, both in Durham and the other city, I forgot the other city, sorry. Denver. We still love you, Denver, trust me. I think it is really telling. And so I think all that to say, this is, I think, an excellent example in what can be. And I think we do have the pieces here in BCRI. I think we also need to be thinking about that clinical response to make sure that we consistently show up for someone, and really begin to, as best as possible, help them find some stability. I think that then keeps them out of the system, keeps them from calling 911 or 211 or 988 or otherwise. But I think it means making sure that the system is well connected. And I think right now that is probably one of the biggest problems. So just more of a commentary than a question. I just appreciate the pulling this all together, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Conway. Madam Vice President, any questions?
I can just make a quick statement.
Please.
Sitting here and, I was just kind of taking some notes and taking this all in and just kind of going back to my experiences when I first started on the council and in campaign mode. And a lot of my trauma, of course, happens in Park Heights. Area that has all different types of crises and trauma situations, and that was 19 years ago. And I remember when I first walked in my campaign on a street and was like 30 seconds from a shooting in a liquor store. And actually witnessed someone, of course, deceased and brains, and that's when I realized, oh my goodness, this is the area where I'm going to be spending most of my time, in which I have. And I'm happy to say that through those 19 years, there has been just so much progress in that neighborhood. And I do give a lot of the credit to our present mayor, because we basically started the same time in different ways, but he is the mayor now. And we have an understanding of, because that was an area that he grew up in and kind of knew the needs. And just me, that one experience was enough for me. And actually seeing our fire department, our EMS, our just consistently doing all kinds of work, including the police department. And of course, that's a relationship that we have had building for a long time in our city. And listening to Mr. Duckett, when you had referenced back to the 60s. I'm a woman of the 70s. And of course, things are definitely different now. And, I'm in awe with all of you, because you did mention the importance of relationship building. And there are outside organizations that I know started in Park Heights, like Safe Streets and We Are Us, and just other groups that have been kind of doing some of that work and helping. And to sit here and see some of these new trauma, different groups in a university setting, our Baltimore City Public School System, the government working. And of course, our president has these forums because He understands that we see these things and need to be a part of it. I heard Councilwoman Ramos of the 14th District just kind of figuring out and understanding why we really don't, we don't see, you know, there's mistakes and gaps, and you have admitted that there's gaps. And that, to me, is a very big step, understanding there's gaps, admitting to it, and I just hope that all of you here today can continue to work together and build that relationship, because that's what, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, relationship building and partnerships. Baltimore is very unique. We are different from Durham and Denver, but we can pick up a few of the, we can pick up some of the successes that, you know, that they have. There's also other outside organizations, like the National Association of Counties and so on, that just do a lot of this good work as well. So please just keep up the good work. I don't know if any of you want to add any comment to what I just said, but it's just good to see this collaboration really starting to form and take place between public, private sector, and the council.
Thank you, Madam VP. I know you could not go a whole hearing without mentioning NACO, so appreciate that. Also want to recognize Councilman Bullock, who is in the House.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Not a problem. Councilwoman Porter, do you want to jump in?
Yeah.
Please.
So I have a few questions as it relates to state level involvement. So I want to talk with BHSB. So one of the major issues that we're running into is mental health wellness checks, and I believe that they're not fully utilized throughout the city and also the state of Maryland. How have you all conferred with your state level partners to expand the programming for mental health wellness checks?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, a mental health wellness check right now runs through 911 and goes to police. So I think part of the opportunity that we're talking about with the civilian response, in partnership as needed with the specific behavioral health response, is about shifting those to non-police to respond.
Yeah, so
And-
that wasn't my question.
Yeah,
Sorry about
well,
that.
and then I would
Yeah.
add, and I'm wondering if this is your question.
Yeah.
Some of that could be reimbursed
Yes, that is correct.
potentially.
Yes.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
That's what I thought.
So how have you all been working with the state
Some
on
of that could potentially be reimbursed
Yep.
through the public behavioral health system. That's something as part of the planning that we will need to figure out collectively here at the local level, but also with state partners.
And where are we in that process?
Well, right now, with what Director Whaley has talked about in the planning around the civilian response is where we are. We're not quite at that point that you're talking about.
Do you have an ETA on when we'll get to a point where we're able to advocate for additional legislation and or integration for reimbursement?
Right now, what I'm talking about actually wouldn't need additional legislation. It would be using the current regulations for mobile crisis response and billing for that. I'm just going to defer to my colleague Adrienne Bridenstine in case I am missing something, because she is the one
And so,
who's
Adrian,
more into-
specifically, it's Senate Bill 328 from FY25 in the Maryland General Assembly. And so Senate Bill 328 actually provides an opportunity for expansion of the mental health resources through the state of Maryland. And so I didn't see any type of discussion in the presentation about any kind of state level involvement. So can you speak more about how you're integrating with state level partners?
Am I on? I am on.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question, Councilwoman. So I think many of you know BHSP works very closely with the Maryland
Adrienne, if you
Department
could
of
just
Health.
introduce yourself just for the
Sure.
record.
Good evening. Adrienne Bridenstine. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Communications at Behavioral Health System Baltimore. So we work really closely with the Maryland Department of Health on regulatory reform and a variety of a variety of things, including implementing the mobile crisis response services. The piece that Krista was talking about earlier around the wellness checks and follow-up, that is now a billable service through the public behavioral health system as of a year ago or 6 months ago, actually. So that's where I think the opportunity is, where we do need to, where we already know we need to do some continued advocacy there is around the reimbursement rate. We are actually actively working this session to do some of that now with the governor and the budget. The reimbursement rate needs to match the level of service that is needed. And we heard some of that from our speakers today around how we need to prioritize care and not doing quick care. We've seen that already in some of our practice, that sometimes it can take several hours, even when you're doing a wellness check or a follow-up, to help ensure that that person is stable and connected to care. So making sure that our reimbursement rates kind of match the level of need and the level of service, actually, the service delivery that's being provided is still an area of advocacy.
Thanks so much. And Krista, that was the response I was looking for. Second question actually has to do with DHCD involvement. So one of the major issues that I would love to see the city work in collaboration on is really DHCD. So those calls that we are getting from 911, any type of inspection, we see those issues happening in community. Calls are coming in from community. Regular folk are labeling them as nuisance properties, nuisance families. How are we making those connections internally within the city?
Sorry. So for those calls that are coming in, they sometimes come into 911 and sometimes to 311. And then for the 311, they are then categorized to the agency to follow up. There has been a lot of interagency collaboration around a lot of those calls. I think this is something that we are continuing to improve upon, that when there are calls where it might be a property, but there are individuals in the property, there is more interagency collaboration, that when agencies are going out, it might be MOHS and other agencies, so that we're connecting individuals that are in that property together. So something that we are working on and still growing, the interagency response.
Councilman Bullock.
Thank you, Mr. President, and apologies for being a little bit late. Just left Planning Commission. We've been there all day doing the work of the council.
Bless you.
But again, I've been monitoring some of this, and I appreciate the work that's being done. I do want to shift to Dr. Buckley. It's good to see you again, and I appreciate your work. One of the things I think is really important to this ecosystem is really the work of social workers. And I'm curious in terms of what barriers may be preventing current social workers or those with training from entering into this crisis response space.
Absolutely. So one of the barriers would be safety. And that's just given, so if the community members are not supported and if they are in a crisis, then whatever safety issues are presented, obviously, puts all of those persons at risk, which is why it's so critical to have the right type of response. Another barrier is the compensation. And I actually heard you speak about, I jotted it down here, we're not hiring solely graduate clinicians. And so at Coppin, we have a BSW program. And so the shortage that the city and the state and federal government—
Could you say what BSW is?
Absolutely, Bachelors of Social Work. Yeah, thank you. The shortage it includes BSW practitioners. And so BSWs are skilled to be able to respond to these sorts of crises. And so, but BSWs also need to be compensated. So the compensation piece is twofold. Number one, creating pathways for BSWs to respond, and then ensuring that BSWs and MSWs alike are compensated for their skill set. And then third, and I guess this is kind of what I was mentioning a moment ago, is the clear pathways, right? So who are the people that are able to step into the role, and really, really being clear about what will an MSW do? What will a BSW do? Does this require a licensure? And my perspective is no, it does not. And that's another issue that we are advocating for. But really cleaning up the language around the pathways, I think that would speak to some of the barriers that are present.
No, I'll just add, that's very helpful. And I just think there's really a large role for social workers to play, particularly, I think, Coppin, because as you know, reason why we're here, these incidents that happen in West Baltimore, right?
Absolutely.
And so one of the things we talk about in terms of the response, people who are more familiar with the community, who are close in proximity. So again, I hope we can find some pathways. Are there any partnerships that are existing now that are getting people into this pipeline that you're aware of?
There are some, but I think that we obviously need to beef them up, you know? And as I'm listening to this, honestly, even though I'm the chair, I really wish that my scholars could be here to speak to this issue, because they are the ones that are boots on the ground. They are from the city, you know, they're learning, they're still involved in the work. And so I have my finger on the pulse, and I'm also a practitioner, but they are the ones to really and truly be able to even identify what those partnerships are that we may not be aware of.
Very well said. I'll say the practitioner and educator in me really appreciates and reflects what you just said, so thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman and Doctor. Appreciate it. Tahir, I'm going to throw one to you. Can you talk about, as Baltimore seeks to build and beef up and support this ecosystem, should it be a comprehensive look? Can you do it in sort of a pilot or a piecemeal fashion, or does it really need to be all in? And I'm thinking about resource allocation. I'm thinking about sort of an initial spend that would stand a program up. You know, can you do this sort of piece by piece, or in your experience looking at best of class around the country, does it really need to be one wholesale, integrated, comprehensive system?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would say is very few programs are where they started.
Sure.
Right, so even ones who maybe started with a broader sort of approach, a broader ambit, they've still changed over the years, in part because most communities kind of want to start a little bit narrower, whether it's geographically, right? So I know Denver, right, and Andrew should speak on this, because Denver started with a smaller geographic area before expanding a little bit more. Other places, they'll start with maybe fewer call types, right? Before they say, hey, actually, maybe you can take a little bit more. Maybe you can actually take some of these well-check calls, or maybe you can take some of these low-level disputes, right? We started with this and we moved to that. As far as where you should start, it's really a political decision as to how committed you are to making it work, right? So if you start narrow, there can be some benefits to that, right? There can be some benefits. Most places don't start 24/7. Most places don't maybe necessarily start entire city. Some places do. Most places don't take as many calls as they could possibly imagine. But the point is, can you look at what happens in the first year and in the second year and then say, okay, what's next, right? Let's not just stop wherever we start. Let's continue to grow and iterate on the program. And so, yeah, I don't know, Andrew, if you want to say anything more about the sorts of benefits or downsides to, you know, geographic limitations to start, but I haven't seen any distinction between, if you do it this way, then you're unsuccessful. You've got some options.
Andrew, you want to jump in?
Happy to speak to that. Can you still hear me? I switched mics.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So yes, Tahir is correct. When we began in 2020, it was a single police district, which was basically just the downtown core of Denver, and a single van. Right. It was really just to prove the proof of concept. We have since expanded to 5 vans and now 8 vans that operate citywide. We also are not yet 24/7, but are moving in that direction. One of the previous council members mentioned the 2024 study that showed the time of day and day of week when those calls are coming in. And as I'm sure you can imagine, the vast majority of calls that come in that need a STAR response are when people are out and about. So they tend to be Monday through Friday during business hours. That's the vast majority of the calls that we get. Not that there isn't still a need overnight, but that's kind of how we have slowly evolved this. So it was 5 days a week, 8 hours a day in one small area of the city. And we've expanded both geographically, the time of day, and then to Tahir's previous point, the call types that are eligible within 911. We started with 7 nature codes and we've expanded it to 10. Including some that required some conversations with the city attorney's office to say, hey, we want to start sending STAR to these calls and not sending police, and making sure that we had top cover from the city attorney so that our dispatchers weren't worried about their liability, right? Which is a whole other conversation that we could get into.
Thanks. Chief, do you want to speak just very briefly in terms of the Durham case, how you all have either started or evolved?
Yes, thank you. So we started similarly. We identified just a geographic area that was much smaller that could accommodate a very small set of staff for responding. We started with crisis call diversion in the 911 center. We had to build out. We started with a very small number. I think there were 10 call types that we started out with that have since grown bigger. As we've been able to reevaluate and assess the types of calls that either co-response can respond to or our clinicians can respond to. So it does start small. You do have to be able to really see what is the need and how far can you stretch, because it does not happen quickly, and that's what we have found. It's you have people that are clinicians that they realize that they get into the work, especially the work that we're doing in Durham, that maybe it's not what they thought it would be, the hours or the constant go, because there is such a demand. And so we're just constantly growing, but we have been able to really be able to streamline now where can we expand to that we are most needed.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Tahir and Andrew and Chief. Really good to hear the sort of evolution and the iterations that you went through. Councilman Blanchard.
Thank you, Mr. President. And this one I think would be for Director Whaley. The two things that need to happen in a system is the calls need to get routed to the right people, and then you have to have a functioning response time. And those are, I think, 2 major baseline things. And so, I know there was money invested in the program in the past, and it's like, hey, how far are we away from this, and what do we need for it? And so I think the question is, what is the budget needed? What is needed to get all the calls properly routed? And it's vague, and I know, and it would have to take some answering on your part. But then what is the what is the response time that we're going for? And I feel like whatever the police department's average response time is a good starting place at, right? Like if I can call, if the police are going to show up in 10 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever the number is, that feels reasonable that as a goal, right? And then so that we should be able to figure out how much it would cost to do that. And then we can figure out how we start narrow and then go big over X number of years or whatever. So I'm sure that that information is not sitting in any of those desks over there right now. So assuming that that's the case, I would like to make a committee request for that analysis and what you think the budget cost would be to get a response time comparable to what we can get from the police department for things that you believe should be being routed to these other professionals.
Mr. President, Tyler Schnell, Deputy Director.
Tyler, sure.
Deputy Director of Government Relations. Councilman, that request, let me follow up on that. That's a budgetary thing, right? So like that, those are conversations that Sarah and team should be having with the mayor and city administrator as we work through FY27 budget development. So let me just follow up on what that would look like, if that's okay.
So then the committee request should be directed at MOGR?
Yeah, that's fine. But I think, Mr. Schnella, I think the councilman is looking for a hypothetical. Like, I don't think he's looking for like a hard commitment for any budgetary allocation from the administration. What I heard the question as is like, what would it cost for, like we heard in Durham, 6.5 minutes for one of their folks to get out there? What would the capacity be needed to build a system where we are able to respond with a clinician or a peer or whomever as fast as we would a police officer? Is that
that's
accurate,
well said. Yes,
Councilman?
thank you, Mr. President.
Right. Okay. And like I said, we'll follow up.
So I'm going to press here a little bit. Could we, Director Whaley, could we get that analysis within 3 weeks of this committee hearing? And it doesn't have to be, look, obviously there's going to be complicating factors and, you know, how much it would take to stand up the social work program component of this. But I think what the councilman is looking for, what I'm looking for, what the committee is looking for is at least an analysis, an attempt by the administration to determine what this would cost to really get to where we want to go, which is best in class.
Yeah, let me just have Dr. D come up and.
Outstanding. Yeah. Hey, Deputy Mayor Gerasa, good to see you.
Letitia Gerasa, Deputy Mayor, Health and Human Services. Thank you so much for that question. I do endorse what our Deputy Director said, but I also want to reiterate that there is $15 million that's been allocated already from opioid restitution funds to support the development of this coordinated citywide response. I also want to delineate, because I think this speaks a little bit to what Councilwoman Ramos was asking before. I think we are talking about two different things. We're talking certainly about mobile crisis and what is needed when someone is experiencing a mental health crisis, a clinician on site immediately. And we're talking about this alternative response that addresses quality of life concerns, someone that's experiencing homelessness or doesn't have someplace to go. So Director Whaley talked a lot about that alternative response. And I think I hear you all asking a lot more about the mobile crisis response. So we do want to provide an accurate answer to that. And so I would like a little bit more time to connect with our colleagues at BHSB who are currently supporting BCRI to make sure that we can give you a cost that aligns with what it would cost to get the same type of response that we've heard about in other places.
Absolutely. Dr. D, what feels like the right amount of time to you?
I think 3 weeks is okay. I think we can work in 3 weeks.
Okay, wonderful. I really appreciate that. Just so we're all on the same page, I think, again, this is in the spirit of both what Councilman Blanchard and Councilmember Ramos were asking. I think what we are, I think what I'm hearing, what we're agreeing on is what it would take to have, again, a best-in-class mobile crisis response. And again, I know these terms get, there's a lot of terms.
Yep.
Tahir knows all of them. But to be able to respond just as quickly as our police respond.
Yeah, no, and I can appreciate that. I think maybe the one other thing I'd add, and again, Director Whaley talked about this a little bit. We have our colleagues here from fire. We have our colleagues here from police. There is a 911 diversion working group. There is QA and QI that's happening on our existing system, and we fully acknowledge that there are gaps, but also appreciate, you know, the current system that we have and how we're trying to work to improve it. So I also don't want that to be lost, you know, on the committee.
No, and I do appreciate that. And again, you know, having spent some time, did a ride along with BCRI, that really appreciate the work that our folks are doing in this space, but also know that I think the frustration we heard, especially at the last hearing, but that we hear from residents, is it's just not fast enough and there's not enough capacity in the system. And so, again, just want to make sure we're clear, 3 weeks for some kind of analysis, what it would cost to build a best-in-class system. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right,
Appreciate
thank you.
Can I also add to that, please?
Yeah, sure,
If
Krista.
possible. I just want to emphasize the interconnectedness of all these multiple pieces that we're talking about. A mobile crisis response, a clinician coming immediately on the scene is not always needed and is not always possible. So we need to be looking at the interconnectedness of it and what it costs for the civilian response, which then would free up capacity for mobile crisis to respond and mobile crisis to respond for those situations that require it. So I just want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing and that we're not talking about a clinician having an immediate response, because I did hear that from my our colleagues, our friends. I feel that way now that we're friends after this hearing, that is not what is happening in the other jurisdictions. So I really want to make that distinction so that we're all on the same page.
Absolutely, and I think it's about deploying the right response for the right situation. Councilman Blanchard, does that work?
Yes, yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, y'all are the experts, and then you come up with the plan that seems like the right way to do it, and then, you know, we ask questions in the hearings, you know, but that sounds about right, yeah.
And also, yeah, I think what we're all getting at is like the calls that are deemed eligible for the different teams is going to be different, and the budget might vary based on that, whether it's a trespassing call or a behavioral health emergency. Like there's a variety of different call types that can be coded for the different teams. And I think an important part of this that we've all talked about is the triage and the coding of those calls and working within these different systems. And that's why we have the different diversion options so that the most appropriate team is going out.
Absolutely. Councilman Parker, and before Councilman, I see she logged off, but did want to thank Chief Andrews for joining us this evening. Councilman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, and this was certainly a big subject of our conversation last time we got together. It was that the clinician crisis response model and the I like the STAR system in Denver that we've been hearing about, and then the peer model are interrelated and in different things. And so, I appreciate the continuing to make those distinctions. And what does it look like for us to be able to do both well in this interconnected way? Question though, Director Whaley, you were just speaking about this. And this may apply certainly to both what the progress we've already made here in Baltimore, but also maybe our friend Andrew from Denver might weigh in too, especially given his role there. What does it look like? How do we equip our 911 operators to be able to triage these calls and to direct the calls to the appropriate civilian response when they're eligible? And so what does that look like so far in Baltimore and in Denver? What does that look like there?
So I really appreciate this question, and this is part of the immense work that the Behavioral Health Collaborative has been doing. There is an entire subcommittee around training, and so as the new call types that are added to our system of the different types of calls that folks can respond to, There has been increased training for the 911 call takers on the different call types. There has been improvements to policy of questions that the call takers can ask. I think we're getting ready to do a refresher course training again as we're hiring new 911 call takers. And I think an important component of this is that the call takers do a lot, and they're really, really great. And having the embedded clinicians at 911 is an additional resource that the call takers have. So if they're not sure about a call, or it's presenting in a certain way, but they're getting a feeling that there might be an underlying behavioral health need, they can rely on the embedded clinician to help support. So I think just increased training and continuous training for the 911 call takers, and then increasing the capacity of the embedded clinicians to be a support to them.
Thank you, Dr. Whaley. And then Andrew, I'm going to remind you of, I think, something I heard you say as you prepare to answer the question too, which is, if I wrote it down correctly, you said that that STAR, when it comes to like receiving a call and thinking about what resource to deploy, that STAR is the starting point, and then you escalate or differentiate up from there. So if you could say more about that, as well as the kind of the training that you all have done there.
Sure, and I really do appreciate this question. So that mindset about STAR being the default and escalating above that is what we are working toward. So much as we have seen across the country with programs like this standing up, the slow sort of adoption that occurs among our law enforcement partners, right? We have the same thing happen within 911. I have dispatchers here who have been sending cops to these types of calls, some of them for a 20-year career. And so there is not only a procedural shift, but a cultural shift that has to happen to explain the why. Why are we doing this? Why is this important? And so a lot of the training and the education we have been doing has really been focused on that, to quote Simon Sinek, starting with why. I'll throw out there, as you all are kind of developing that training stuff, I would love to be kept in the loop, because we are always looking at ways to kind of innovate and improve and continue that process, because it is a longer process. We've also been working with the Meadows Institute out of Austin, Texas, who have really started to kind of tackle this challenge around how do you train 911 call takers, not only to recognize when there's a mental health or behavioral health element to something that may not be obvious, but then also how do you create training and education that establishes civilian response systems like what Denver has, what Baltimore is building, as a part of just kind of table stakes for 911. So there's a lot of work happening across the country, and certainly Tahir and Kix are doing a whole lot of research and work. There are convenings that I would absolutely recommend that representatives from Baltimore come out, and a lot of these are just a bunch of us sitting in a room, sometimes just admiring the problem and then going, okay, how do we solve for this? So it's an ongoing process, but it's an incredibly exciting one. And there are a lot of really smart people working on that exact question, Councilmember.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Director Whaley. Thank you, Mr. President.
Can I say one thing just to follow up on that? Because it's a great question, and it's one of the most important ones, right? None of this works if you then call into 911 and a bunch of dispatchers keep sending out police, and then you got a bunch of responders sitting in a room somewhere, playing solitaire, right? So I think there's two things that I just want to flag. One is that law enforcement ends up being an important part of this conversation as well, because inevitably some calls are going to get dispatched and law enforcement's going to show up. And then the question is, do they say, oh, you know what? We need to get STAR to come out here. We need to get HEART to show up here, whatever you end up calling it. Every CARE seems to be in vogue these days. We're going to get these folks to come up. I'm going to hop on the radio and say, you know what, this isn't for us. Let me pop this off to somebody else. So you really want something of a Swiss cheese kind of approach. So I think that's one part of it. I think the other thing that can really end up mattering here, and I've heard this from 911 jurisdictions across the country, is starting to acclimatize call takers to what happens on the other end, right? Oftentimes, call takers, dispatchers, their job is to get folks out, but it's not necessarily to find out what actually happens with a call later on, right? So some of it is about doing, really, really regular conversations that can drive home, hey, when you saw X, Y, and Z, and you sent out, EMS, actually that one could have been a community responder. Or, you saw X, Y, and Z, and you sent out the community responder. Hey, actually that one should have been police because there was this thing that was floating in the background. This was the additional question that we should ask. And that's something that is, is new for some 911 jurisdictions.
Can I just add about our QA/QI process that we have right now for the diversion work that we're doing? So as part of the consent decree, we have a lot of subcommittees in the collaborative, and some of them are exactly what you just said. So there are regular meetings where the embedded clinician, 911 supervisors and call takers are on the call, BPD, fire, and then our team, you guys are there too. And they review the missed opportunity calls. They'll review the transcript of the call to identify where there were missed opportunities and why. And that's informed a lot of our training and the refresher training. So as we see those things, if it's continued missed opportunities, we really dig into the why is that happening, and that informs the training for various different components of our system. And those are happening, I think they're monthly calls, or there's a lot of meetings. And so there's a lot of this QA/QI happening for our diversion system right now. And so as we continue to grow, I think that's a really important component for us to keep doing.
Thank you. Councilman Jones?
Yes, my original question was for Chief Andrews, who left. So, but I'll take this moment to just make a quick statement and just want to thank everyone for your support and your help in involving this conversation and identifying steps that we should take to move into the right direction. Because I just say where we are now, I think we can be in a better spot, but I think we're positioned very well in this city to do better. I think we have a lot of great institutions such as Coppin and University of Maryland that have people who are doing this work and want to lean in and have that practical experience and serve Baltimore however they can. And the best way we can connect those dots, I think the better. So I'm excited about just figuring out next steps to kind of evolve and get this thing rolling. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Councilman. Councilmember Ramos?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sorry I had to leave for a little bit. So if this question was already asked, please just stop me in my tracks. One question I had, well, first I wanted to just say that I've heard the example a couple of times where one of the responses would be to folks that are experiencing homelessness. But can we just figure this out for a second? Because when I get a call about somebody experiencing homelessness, I go to homeless services. And that is a 311 call, that is tracked. They have a whole system of how to help people once they agree to services to get into the hotels and to housing. I could see a scenario where there may need to be both at some times because of maybe somebody having a health crisis or they're not understanding or, there's something happening there that really requires additional guidance for our folks experiencing homelessness. Is that kind of what you're thinking? Because just somebody experiencing homelessness, we have been told to work with our homeless services folks. Because what I'm really focused on this issue of somebody being in crisis. I have too many residents in crisis that have been in crisis for a really long time, and we didn't have the capacity or, to do anything, and I'm glad we're moving in that direction. So I maybe this is an exercise that we do one-on-one to sort of look at what are the scenarios that we're trying to address, and I'm sure you're doing that. Because again, if there's somebody experiencing homelessness, I'm not calling 911.
we met with MOHS today, and I just really appreciate your question because it's the questions that we're having and how the system that we're building would support the amazing work that MOHS does. MOHS is unfortunately not 24/7, and so I'll just give the example of New Year's Eve. I came home after ringing in the new year, and there was a woman asleep on the sidewalk on our street, and I would say she's not in. That's a type of crisis, right? It's very cold and she's sleeping not in a warm bed inside. She's on the street. And MOHS is not operating at 1 o'clock in the morning. And so the question was, who do I call? And I think there's an option to call 911. It's not that type of an emergency where it's, a violence situation. It's not a medical emergency, but it could be an emergency. We could wake up in the morning and something could have happened in the night. And so we had a conversation, her and I, about, what her options were, and she wanted to stay there. And I think there is an opportunity for an alternative response team that is 24/7, that if we did call 911, there's a compassionate team that could go out and engage with her. And I think the thing that you said about MOHS is if someone agrees to go to shelter. And there are a lot of people, and I know a lot of the constituent concerns that come in from folks are these individuals that are refusing to go to shelter or refusing to engage with MOHS. And so I think a component of our safety net system that I didn't hit on a lot is a component of the SAMHSA continuum of care, and that's a place to go. And so as part of our safety net of systems, we're also thinking about what are safe spaces for people to go that are really low barrier, that could help facilitate trust as people start to get more involved with our system and with a housing navigator to get them connected to care. But sometimes just being warm, engaging with someone, a place to sit for a little bit can help facilitate conversation and engagement with some of the higher barrier services that people might be more reluctant to engage with.
Yeah, I think the point is kind of just making sure that we're clear about what's happening because people call us. They call us.
And I think ideally this is also a resource for you all.
That's right, yeah.
That we all know that if you call 911, you're not there is a plethora of options. And again, coming back to what we've said a lot in this hearing is the appropriate response and having an appropriate response for a situation like that as well.
I guess I wanted to make a request around, and I didn't find it in any of the handouts, the data that you're already collecting from the 911 diversions. I'd be interested to know, and you may have presented it last time, I don't remember, but like, what are you seeing? What are the, I mean, I can just imagine, but I'd love to see the numbers as to what those calls are, because I think that will also inform the piece that the councilman and I were asking for around the date about the budget as well.
Yeah, and my understanding, just to pick up on that, is that it's a relatively small amount of calls that we're diverting. And this was kind of the theme of the last hearing, was that it's only a couple hundred calls that are being diverted from 911 to 988.
So I think there's a couple figures that are important. It's the number of calls that are eligible, and then the number of calls, that smaller percentage are the ones that result in a full diversion. So there's also co-response, which is a partial diversion. And so we are working on that. We have we do semi-annual reports for the consent decree that include those numbers. Our next one is about to come out. So happy to share that with you and follow up if needed.
Thank you.
That would be great as a committee request. I do remember, because my team did a bunch of research, and there was sort of this funnel of like calls that come in, calls that are eligible for diversion, and then calls that are actually being diverted, and the final number was very, very, very low. And it's important that we expand that number. Seeing no more questions, I want to just sincerely thank everybody for joining us this evening. It is government doing what it is supposed to do to have these types of conversations. I really appreciate to hear Andrew, thanks for sticking with us, the chief that was here, all of our Baltimore friends. You know, this is what it should look like when we are collaborating, and there is going to be creative tension in collaboration, but it is good to see everybody working together to build the system that Baltimore deserves. I also want to really say that I think looking at best practices is important. We should be setting our goals high. We should be honest about where we are and where we need to get to. We should be honest about how much it would cost. We know that resources are tough to come by these days, that our state is having significant financial challenges, and that will, of course, fall onto us in the city as well. We've been blessed, and we're glad, Director Whaley, that you're running the opioid restitution fund and the incredible resources that our city solicitor was able to get for us. And I think it does create some opportunities for us to be really creative. I want, and this council wants, best in class. I want Baltimore to be the best. I want to study our model and say to Durham and Denver and all these places that what Baltimore did was incredible. I think we can get there, just as Councilman Jones framed it, that we have all the capacities between all the different partners in this room and the many, many partners that are not here. But I think that should be our North Star. That should be our goal. I'm looking forward to going to Durham. I'm glad that some folks from the administration are going to be joining us. I also want to sincerely thank my folks that did an enormous amount of work for this hearing. Evie, Lucinda, Alana, who are sitting in the back, did absolutely outstanding research and got all the people that were before us tonight to show up. So thank you to you all. With that, this hearing is dismissed, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.